Okay, it looks like we're good to go. Hello, my name is Harlan Brothers. Thank you all for being here today. Uh, Almost exactly a year ago, my friend Cole Frederick and I started a publication called Science Spectrum. And at this point, we have well over 11,000 followers. What brought Cole and I together is the shared conviction that there's so much fun and exciting math and science out there to explore, but most of it, or at least a lot of it, is simply not accessible to a whole lot of people. So we figured we'd try to do whatever we could to help remedy the situation. Today, I'm going to talk a bit about how I approach science and math stories, and maybe that'll resonate with you. In a broad sense, I think that there are two general approaches to writing. One is the sort of top-down model where you have an idea and you build out a framework, you have an introduction and a bunch of bullet points for development and an ending. And then you go back and fill in all the bits. I don't know anybody like that, and it's not the way that I write. I prefer a more organic approach. I like the process of watching a story unfold in real time as it develops from the seedling of an idea. I think that my approach is probably rooted in my training as a jazz musician and composer, and also many years of Zen practice. When I'm writing a song, I am always asking myself, where does this melody want to go? And I think that for me, this organic approach helps to address arguably the biggest challenge, one of the fundamental difficulties in science and math writing, and that is, how do you present your work in a way that's engaging for the widest audience possible? I don't want to, I'm sorry, I'm just getting some notes in here. I don't want to bore people who are knowledgeable in the subject. I also don't want to dumb down the story to the point where it becomes bland, but I also don't want to turn off earnest readers who don't have the training in the subject and simply aren't familiar with the symbols, terminology, or jargon associated with the subject. So we will get to some concrete tips on how to approach this. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about my mindset when I'm writing. I try to write as if I'm exploring a subject for the very first time, and sometimes I am. This is the beginner's mind that I reference in the title of this session. I find it especially important to keep this in mind when it's a subject that I'm particularly familiar with. I find it's very easy to assume what seems like basic knowledge, but that isn't really basic for a lot of people. The point here is that when I write, hold on a second. I am seeing something from Medium staff. Oh, my chat window's closed. Hold on one second. Greetings. Oh my goodness, there's people from all over the world. This is far out. Thank you all. Zoom lagged. Okay. At any rate, yes. So, I'm sorry. The point is that I try to write, as I write, that is, I am constantly asking myself, what about this explanation might be confusing? So, I think it's very helpful for putting yourself in the mind of your potential readers. Speaking of confusion, I'm reminded of a mentor of mine, a very dear and wonderful person, an extraordinary educator and a beloved professor at Yale named Michael Frame. And he did a TED Talk years ago in which he talks about how he relates to his students. And he said that I know what it's like to be confused as a student. So mind you, this is a brilliant individual, somebody who worked side by side with Benoit Mandelbrot for the better part of 2 decades. And so I figure if it's okay for Michael Frame to be confused, it is okay for anybody to be confused. Having said that, I'd like to look at an example of what I mean by an organic process, at least what it means to me. Perhaps with a story, I can illustrate my thinking process. And I'd also like to share some ways that Cole and I engage with our readers. But one thing before we continue, I do want to say that my goal in writing here is for the reader to leave not only with new knowledge, but hopefully with a sense of accomplishment at having acquired that new knowledge. So let me head over here to resources. I'm not sure where these will show up. I'm going to activate some links and we'll see what happens as far as whether you see them or not. If you do, great, you can open them on your end. But if not, I am going to share the window with the article in it so that we can look at this together while we talk. Let's see. Can I? Okay, hold on 1 second. Just checking the chat window. And we're going to share this. Here we go. And now, hopefully, I'm not going to sign in here with Google. I'm already in. Let's close that. So hopefully everybody sees a story called Finger Paints, Fractals, and the Incredible George Sand. Now, the thing is, I am not, oh, let me just check the chat and see if there's any issue here. Okay, so if you see those links, as I said, you can click on the button that says Finger Paints, and this will open up. Otherwise, hopefully everybody can see what I'm looking at now. Get this out of the way. So when I started this article, if I had just started with the idea and kind of made a framework for it, I would have started with this lab that we did at the Yale fractal geometry workshops, where I worked with Michael Frame and Benoit Mandelbrot for many years. As I explained in the introduction, there were a bunch of labs, and one really stood out. Everybody had a great time. Perhaps it brought back childhood memories, but it was this process of doing decalcomania. And it simply means you're taking 2 pieces of paper, you're smearing some paint on one of them, pressing together, pulling them apart, and looking at the beautiful designs that result. So, okay. So hopefully you are looking at this article again, only this time it's the full article. As I was saying, decalcomania. So the first thing I did was to go and check on the etymology of this word. And it goes back a couple of hundred years. I'm not going to read the article with you. You're certainly welcome. I'd be honored if you read it later. But the point is, in starting to do the research, I found out a little bit about the history of this. So I describe a little about the physics and how it works, what makes it work. But what I found was that a couple of hundred years ago, there was a painter named Alexander Kazins, and he did something very similar. He did these blots and it made kind of natural shapes. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is super cool. And he traced it back to Leonardo da Vinci. But it also turns out that there was another artist who was better known as a writer named George Sand. And Sand is an amazing person, somebody to be familiar with. She was one of the great European romantic writers. She was a trailblazer for women's rights, a real renegade, and just an incredible person. And what I learned was that she, later in life, became a painter. And she was very creative. And she used this process of decalcomania to produce paintings that have hung in the Louvre and in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, among other places. So she's the real McCoy. And so I started looking at this stuff. And originally, I had thought that maybe I'd take one of the fractal geometry workshop prints, like the image up in the header here, and maybe show how to do a fractal analysis of this. But the work of George Sand seemed far more interesting. And so, I should mention along the way, I found that there were a bunch of surrealist painters who really took off with this technique. Because of copyright issues, I couldn't use any of their images, so I put links in. But George Sand really, really impressed me. So I thought I would try and take one of her images and do a fractal analysis of it and see how that went. So I found this one. It looked like exactly the kind of thing that would work. And I talk about how we go about taking some rigorous fractal measurement of this picture. I'm sorry, I'm scrolling a little bit erratically here. So we turn this into a binary image. I'm not going to go through the whole article, as I said, but you'll see the process that unfolded. And then when I do these articles, we'll talk about it again in a few minutes about images and using images. But I almost always make custom images for my articles. And in this case, we're talking about a technique called box counting, where you use smaller and smaller boxes and you count how much of the picture is in each box. And when you do this, you might find something called a power law. And when you plot this power law in a certain way, it falls on a straight line, and you know that you have some kind of fractal relationship. So here's an illustration of what happens when we put boxes over that black and white image of the George Sand painting. And here's some of the data. And here's what happens when we plot the log of the size of those boxes against the log of the plot, the count rather. And it turns out it's an unusually good example. Usually there are errors in here. The line, it might be pretty good. That is, if it's fractal to begin with. You'll get a fair amount of error. This falls remarkably well along the regression line. So I then thought that it might be super fun to try and make an animation of how this box counting works. And I found some, I use Wolfram Mathematica, and there are a lot of resources out there. And I found some work by Shabalk. I forgot how he pronounces his name, Horvat, and a wonderful mathematician that did kind of the thing I was interested in. So I wrote that code for my purposes here, and we can see how this turns into, you have to, oh no, don't tell me. I'm really sorry about this. I really thought that by using the shared, the friend link, that I wouldn't have any issues with loading the page. But at any rate, you have the animation there. And in the end, where this story brought me was really unusual. It was a terrific exploration for me. And it's something that wouldn't have happened, that connection between this artistic form, this childhood activity, the fractal geometry behind it, the actual rigorous measurement of it, and this cultural connection to a brilliant person. I ended up, by the end of this, learning that George Sand was in fact a polymath, not just an amazing writer and a maverick and a trailblazer for women's rights, but she was a true polymath. And that her work really is an excellent example of fractal structure. So let's move on here. I'm going to stop sharing this screen. I want to get to some actual resources here. Let's see. So I'm going to share something else. And let's see here. Tips for engagement. Okay. Hopefully you're all now seeing Science spectrum tips for strengthening reader engagement. And just looking here. Okay, don't seem to be any issues at the moment. So the first tip for reader engagement is images. The second one, images. The third one, images. Images are really important. There's a bunch of research out there that shows that particularly for science writing, including relevant images really helps your article along. And people ingest information in all sorts of different ways. And some can deal with just dense text, but not the majority of people. So having relevant images is really helpful. Wikimedia Commons is a great source for Creative Commons images that you can use for free with attribution. If you can make your own images, that's a terrific way to go. It's always great to see that the image is by the author. I think the subject is actually participants can now see my, well, I hope you've been seeing it already. I just got a little message on the screen. So, and it's not just images for the sake of images. I've seen awful examples of somebody, for instance, who was writing about economics and the difficulties of certain situations and included an AI image of a gladiator in a coliseum with blood spattered everywhere. And it didn't work for me. So the judicious and well thought out use of images and illustrations is super important. And also placing them nicely, having a rhythm in your story, which also leads to the next one, using a clean layout. You'll find that Cole and I always use subsections, and we try to keep the text in digestible chunks. You don't want people to glaze over. If you give them the idea, give them 3 sentences, 4 sentences. Sometimes it's a little longer, but the point is, look at it, think of it as digestible chunks of your text. For math articles, you want to try and avoid inline equations. Let me just see here. I want to show an example, but I can't do it while I'm sharing. So we're going to close that. And okay. Sorry, this can't go any faster. I thought I had it all set up in advance to just whip right through these. Okay. And we're back. And we're going to share that screen. Up. Okay. Okay. So here's a math-oriented article. Whenever I have mathematical equations, I always make sure to put them on a separate line. A lot of writers will put them in line. In other words, it'll be part of a sentence. And then what you've written gets kind of lost with the text, particularly for math articles. When you're trying to appeal to as many people as possible, many of them are not going to be mathematicians. In fact, I'm reasonably sure that the majority of them won't be mathematicians. They want to understand this stuff. You need to make it really easy for them by breaking out things line by line, using text where appropriate. Unfortunately, Medium does not use anything like MathJax yet. So sometimes you have to render your own stuff in LaTeX or LaTeX and then take screenshots and pop them up there. But the point is, where there are equations, you want to put them nice and cleanly on their own lines. Also, it's not appropriate in this particular case, but use equation numbers, just like you would in a research paper. You can just use the caption to say equation 1, equation 2, et cetera, and so forth. So back to the list. And Oh, I'm running a little late here. Okay. Whenever possible, use the active voice. The passive voice is passive. It's not as engaging. Um, so if you reference a study, you don't want to say a study was conducted by Ebner and Winkeldorf. You want to say in 2003, Ebner and Winkeldorf conducted a study. Little example, but you want to try and be aware of that active voice. Use links to additional resources. There is a caveat here, though, because you don't want too many times where the reader is going to bounce out of your article to another website. So explain as much as you can, and it's okay, though, to include outside resources. You can include links, and this is what Cole and I always do, to deeper dives at the end of your article for people to get just more information about what you're writing to. Now, I will take just a couple of quick minutes. So I'll skip to the last one first, which is use animations if appropriate. I do this often. There are ways to do this. If first of all, Wikipedia does have some cool animations, you can use those. Otherwise, various chat engines will write code for you. You can get something to write a Python script to generate an animation for you. That can be work in and of itself, but then you can open that up in Google Colab. And that's probably a subject for a whole nother talk. So I want to talk about these skip to links because they're really, really useful. When you have a knowledgeable reader, you might not want them to have to go through every single thing you read. Maybe they can skip ahead to the really juicy part, but you want to include the stuff in there for those readers you don't want to lose. So let me just open up one more example here. Okay. And okay. So we're looking at an article called The Fractal Math of a Healthy Heart. This is another one of those that I learned a lot about, a subject I learned a lot about simply by writing the article. In fact, Cole has written a really great article about how he learns from writing. It's another thing we have in common. So there's a bunch of details here. Now, all noise is not created equal. One of Mandelbrot's major contributions to science and mathematics was the concept of scaling noise. It was a subject to which he devoted considerable attention. If you're already familiar with the subject of scaling noise, you can skip ahead. So scaling noise is all this cool stuff, if I do say so myself. But if it's something you already know about, you don't need to scroll through it. You can just click on this link that says skip ahead. Oh, great. Okay, so in this view, for some reason, it's not skipping ahead. But what it will do in a regular browser, in a regular session, is skip down past that to the part that says a new perspective on heart rate variability. You'll just have to take my word for it. I'd like to show you how to do that very quickly. If you right-click on where you want to skip to, you can say Inspect Element. And this looks different now because we're in Safari. But it's opened up entirely differently. But okay, so there's a little link, a highlighted part here that says H3 ID A123. That A123 is something that you just tack on to the last part of your link. And then it will jump there. I think I should probably just do something entirely separate on that. If I can just get in there to no, because I'm not in under me, so I can't edit. Okay, we'll leave it there. I'm sorry about that, but I would like to take a moment to take any questions that you have. I really haven't left a whole lot of time for that, but I really should do that. So we have a few questions here. Let's see. What about citations, references to other sources? So those I will put down at the end under additional resources. You can use a journal form and put brackets around the link. You can also use this if you really want to be ambitious. You can use this skip to function to find the ID of that point in your article and add it, hashtag, and then those numbers, like hashtag A123 will jump down to that. So if it's a reference, you can jump down to your reference. Just see right over here if I can get this open really quick for us. Let me see, are there any other questions while we're here? I am actually going to stick around for a little bit afterwards so that if anybody has any questions or wants to discuss anything about the publication, we can do that. And I'm sorry. So let's just see here. I really want to show you what this looks like. Edit story. Okay. I'm going to share one more window with you real quick. I'm sorry to be rushed here. Zoom and share. And here is a story that I'm editing. And now you can see when I go to skip ahead, when I put the cursor over that link, you see it says hashtag 1C85. That is just tagged on to the full URL for the actual article. So all right, I think it's time to go. I do want to say, let me get rid of this. I know that I'm speaking for Cole too when I say thank you. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to our amazing writers. Thank you to our followers. And especially thank you to all of our friends at Medium who've been so supportive and made this all possible. And as I said, I will be hanging around. I'll be in the booth. If it's open now, I'll be hanging out there for a while. So I'd be happy to catch up with any of you at the booth. Thank you again. Be well.